Well, since the opening in 1931, the Joslyn Art Museum became one of Omaha's gems, both in arts and architecture.
And the Art Deco building now has a new wing, 42,000 square feet addition added to it, and it will be open to the public on Tuesday, marking the grand reopening of the museum after 2 years. Producer Roger Hamer shows us the changes both inside and out.
The Joslyn Art Museum has always stood out with its Georgia pink marble siding and iconic columns at the entryway. There's a new look inside. The new Hawks Pavilion provides easy access for visitors. The new structure holds 16,000 square feet of space in 10 galleries, making viewing sustainable for art lovers.
This is the first complete reinstallation of the permanent collections, we believe, since the museum opened in 1931. The museum will now display 5,000 years of human creativity, so truly ancient to contemporary art across media, traditions, and cultures.
Improved lighting in all three buildings comprising the museum make viewing artwork more palatable to visitors. And the addition of all that space gives the museum flexibility in how that art is displayed.
This definitely has given us an opportunity to re-examine how the collections are set in place, to think more about design and about the way that visitors engage with works of art.
Architect Craig Dyker says he spent hours looking at the original design and created one that ties into the original look while taking a move forward to the future with curved lines and sitting areas. He says the look on the outside was just as important as the look inside.
The new grounds, the landscape, with I think a much better arrangement of sculpture and places to sit and relax. There's many more places to relax than there used to be. These are very powerful moments for us.
Entering the museum is easily attained on the north side. Landscape architect Michelle Delk wanted to make entering the facility just as inviting as the inside. A tough decision was reached.
A lot of discussion about closing what used to be a drive that connected to 24th, just off to my right. And when we landed on that decision about the arrival, that allowed us to then really rethink what was once basically curbs and asphalt. And we were so excited about how that could tie into the existing Discovery Garden, which had really felt, quite removed and isolated.
And as the finishing touches continue outside and work is finalized inside, the new addition promises to continue Joslyn's appeal to the metro area for years to come. On your side, Roger Hamer, WOWT 6 News.
Can't wait to get inside and see it. Well, as we mentioned, the museum reopens to the public Tuesday, and admission is always free.